Thank you, Mayor Coogan, for the warm welcome for hosting us. I've had such a strong working relationship with Mayor Coogan from day one. He's really been a superb public servant for Fall River, and I'm also so pleased to see here your entire state delegation. You've got State Senator Mike Rodricks and State Representatives Carol Fiola, Alan Sylvia, and Paul Schmid. Just an absolute heavy hitter state delegation at the State House, and in collaboration with me, they are fighting every day for Fall River. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. So I'm Jake Auchincloss, and I'm your representative in Congress. According to my 2-year-old son, that means that I ride airplanes and elevators. But really, it means that I'm your voice and vote in Washington, D.C., and that's the privilege of a lifetime. But to be candid, it's only the third best decision I ever made standing for office. Number 2 was joining the Marine Corps. I commanded infantry platoons in Afghanistan and special operations in Panama. Number 1 was asking my wife, Michelle, to marry me. We have 2 children now, Teddy and his younger sister, Grace, and I'm already reading to them the same American history that I loved growing up. Now, whether it's as a father raising my kids in my hometown, or as a Marine officer overseas, or as your congressman in Washington, I want one thing for our country. I want us to be the nation that we told the world we could be in 1776, a nation of freedom, of opportunity, of equal justice under law. I want my children and yours to grow up in a land of possibilities where the circumstances of an individual's birth do not determine the condition of their life. So now let me tell you about Congress. And it's not as bad as it looks. There's 435 members of Congress. And as with most lines of work, 10 to 20% of them are bad apples. Their antics drive social media and cable news. I don't work with them because they're not here to work. They're here to perform. My job is to bring people together to get things done, to pass laws and to make progress towards our land of possibilities. So what is possible this term in divided government? Internationally, Congress can drive towards the defeat of Russia and Ukraine and chart a long-term strategy to outcompete China. Nationally, we can negotiate a responsible debt and budget deal to prevent a catastrophic default. And locally, we can start building the infrastructure and the industry that last Congress, under Democratic leadership, we invested in. Now, as a member of the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the Chinese Communist Party and the United States, and as a strong supporter of Ukraine, I'm going to be engaged on foreign policy regarding both China and Russia this term. As a lawmaker with business experience and degrees in economics and finance, I'm tracking closely the numbers that are driving our debt and budget challenges, with particular attention to protecting Social Security and Medicare in any potential compromise. And then finally, as a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, both last term and this term, I'm going to continue to focus on water infrastructure and clean energy development, particularly offshore wind. Last Congress, we made generational progress on clean water and clean energy, along with a host of other priorities like mental health and lowering drug prices. And now we need to implement these programs thoughtfully and thoroughly. That will be my focus. And now I'd love to hear from you about your issues and priorities. I'll turn it over to you. Yes, sir.
One, I'm the person who wrote you the letter about the disrespectful behavior of one of your staffers on the phone. I don't know if you received that letter, but is that person here today by any chance?
You can direct your commentary with me.
So they're not here today?
Again, you can direct it with me.
I did. I didn't hear from you. I did hear from your chief of staff, who was excellent, but it was completely inappropriate. But the other thing too is, why only an hour for a town hall meeting?
Why don't we focus the questions and answers on hearing people's questions, and I can respond to it on issues of substance.
Oh, that wasn't substantial. Okay. All right.
Yes, ma'am. You.
Wondering where you saw, or if you saw, the legislation to repeal the windfall exemption provision and the government pension offset going anywhere in this session of Congress.
Yeah, you're referring to H.R. 82, which is the provision to. Yeah, the question is about a bill, H.R. 82, that helps those, particularly widows, who need to access Social Security benefits because their spouse predeceased them and they were working for some portion of their career. And it's basically a loophole in the law that is depriving them of accessing Social Security benefits. This is an issue that I'm very aware of. It had, I think, more than 300 bipartisan co-sponsors last Congress. I was one of them. I'm committed to a fix. I can't tell you what the prospects are. I don't. The House GOP now is in control of the floor, meaning that it's Speaker Kevin McCarthy who decides what legislation makes it to the floor, and I can't predict that. But I am in support of the fix, and will continue working on it this Congress and next.
Yes, sir.
So drawing on your experience in Panama, would we be better served diverting all our federal funds from fighting drugs in South America and just using it to secure the border? Would we have better results?
I don't think it's an either-or question here. I think we know that, one, we've got a crisis of fentanyl, in particular importation at the southern border. The Chinese are sending the raw materials for the manufacture of synthetic opioids to Mexico. The Mexican drug cartels are then manufacturing them and shipping them across the border. And then an almost insatiable American demand is pulling that product across the border. It's a catastrophe. We're losing 2 Vietnams worth of Americans every year to opioid addiction. It's hollowing out our communities. And we've got to handle it holistically. So we've got to increase substance abuse and mental health services for those who are struggling with opioid addiction. We need to do better awareness and education around the issue, as we did, for example, with teen nicotine use back when I was a kid. And then we've got to crack down in conjunction with the Mexican government on the drug cartels in Mexico, as well as work to get China to honor its commitment to stop the fentanyl exportation that it told us in 2019 it was going to do. It did for a while, and then it opened it up again in the last year. So there's diplomatic as well as local efforts underway here. Of course, we need a secure border. Every sovereign nation needs a secure border. But that doesn't need to take away efforts from investing in the countries of origin of a lot of our emigres who are struggling with crime and poverty that is causing people to flee for a better life. And we can be both working with those host countries as well as securing our border.
Next question is over here, Congressman.
Hi, Congressman Auchincloss. It's great to see you again. Thank you for coming to Fall River. 2 years ago, around this time, the median gross rent in Fall River was $918 according to the United States Census. 2 years later, the average rent in Fall River is a little over $1,700. And as we know, 2 years ago, there's been a huge influx of market rate housing that this city does not want to put a stop to equalize what's going on. And our city residents have been voicing their concerns about being priced out. It's so much of a problem that Boston City Council has passed the Michelle Wu's home rule petition to bring rent control for Boston. And there is a bill right now in the legislature to make it statewide. And it's so much of a problem that the city of New Bedford, the mayor of New Bedford has put forward or the city council has put forward a non-binding ballot question to bring rent control in New Bedford. So my question to you is this. This city is not listening to the people. And I'm here speaking for every single Fall River resident.
What's the question?
My question is, what are you going to do to direct Paul Coogan to decrease his love affair for market rate housing and to put in affordable housing? Because I'm getting calls from seniors.
All right, I hear your question. It's a question and answer. It's not a stump speech.
It's not a stump speech. My thing is this. It's a real concern.
I will respond. Hold on. I will respond. So first of all, the cost of housing is the single biggest problem in Massachusetts right now. Full stop. It's a crisis in Massachusetts. I see it with young families trying to buy their first home or rent their first home. I see it with senior citizens who are in panic mode about their ability to afford rent, groceries, prescription drugs, and it's north and south of the district. It is going to require a suite of solutions, federal, state, and local. At the federal level, we've got to expand the low-income housing tax credit, which creates strong incentives for developers to build affordable housing. It's an effective program. It's underfunded. We got to increase the funding for it. At the state level, they need to, they have passed the MBTA Communities Act, which will require cities with access to MBTA service to build more missing middle, multifamily, and mixed-use development. Fall River is not one of those cities or towns, but increasing the supply of housing closer to Boston will take some of the steam out the kettle and reduce overall housing prices throughout the labor market of greater Boston. And then I'm not going to, I'm aware Fall River is not a member of the MBTA Communities Act law. And I'm not going to respond to your commentary on the local level with Mayor Coogan, but because you did call him out by name, I do think he deserves the chance to speak to what he's doing at the local level. Mayor, if you want to, it's up to you.
I'd rather let other people up.
All right.
I've talked to Nelson enough.
I have heard you on multiple times address it. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
There you go.
Okay, my name's Mary Feidelberg. I live in Fall River, and I would respectfully ask that everyone in the audience who has lost a family member to COVID this year raise their hand. Everybody, like this year, last year, since the start of the pandemic, and I don't just mean your mother and your father. I mean your cousins, your friends, not your friends, your cousins, your mother, your father, your aunts, your uncles. We had the highest COVID rate in the Commonwealth for the pandemic as an average. And Senator Auchincloss, I would like to ask you, as your father is the #2 man at the CDC for epidemiology, when are you going to address the rampant disease clusters in our community? Because we're being told our #1 problem is housing and pricing. And I gotta tell you, from where I sit, our #1 problem is driving kids to the hospital in Boston after school and going to visit our ailing parents in nursing homes and holding their hands when they're dying. To me, all of our industrial contamination and the pending LNG scam, where you want to stick a regional LNG facility on the Taunton River, that's our problem. And the scrap metal, which has been totally declassified as a Class A industrial contaminant by our government, is another problem, as is the plan to bring us all the fly ash, all the refuse from coal plants in Massachusetts and New England. Here. You're bringing it here.
A lot in there. So
Poison. It's that simple.
beginning of 2021, as I took office for the first term and as President Biden sworn in for the top of his term, we were facing the worst public health crisis in this country since World War I, losing tens of thousands of Americans daily. And through investment in public health, through really a national effort, we have been able to get through the worst of the pandemic.
Not here.
We have been able to get through the worst of the pandemic, understanding that infectious disease, including COVID, is a persistent concern, and that we've got to continue to treat infectious diseases and communicable diseases seriously and continue to support those who are suffering from long COVID or acute cases of COVID. You talked about poison or about contaminants. I do want to address one of those issues, which is PFAS. We have seen a rise of PFAS, which are carcinogenic small molecules in water systems throughout Massachusetts.
Not in our aquifer yet, sir.
This is, all right, let me address the question. This is an issue that I take incredibly seriously because everyone deserves to have confidence in the potability of their water when they turn on the tap. And I've been personally ensured that tens of millions of dollars have been directed towards PFAS remediation and water treatment facilities throughout the Massachusetts Fourth, and I'm going to continue to make clean water one of the top priorities of my time in office.
Congressman, right here.
Thank you. Congressman, I do want to thank you for being here, because frankly, you're the only representative that I have that I ever hear from. I don't hear from anybody else. I don't get any emails from anybody else. I always know what you're doing, so thank you. I appreciate that. But my question really is about choice, and choice for women. I know that in Massachusetts, we're lucky enough to be here where we are a place that does support a woman's right to choose, but there are plenty of women across the country who are living in places that don't. And my concern is about them, not about me. What are the Democrats, or whoever, Democrats, whoever, whoever you belong to, what are we going to do about restoring choice to the rest of the women across the country?
I appreciate the question and the comment. First of all, I want to recognize your state delegation, who, along with their colleagues at the State House, made Massachusetts not just a safe haven for women who are seeking to use reproductive health care, but also really became a source of strength for women throughout the country. Massachusetts is a haven state where women can cross state lines to access the care that they need, and that puts Massachusetts squarely at the forefront of the defense of Roe, as it should be, and they deserve a tremendous amount of credit for that. At the national level, two things. In the short term, we've got to protect the access to abortion medication. This is really the near-term fight, which is for a lot of first trimester abortions can be done with medication. That medication can be shipped from a pharmacy, oftentimes a pharmacy that's out of state. And there are states now that are trying to crack down on the ability for a woman to order in by mail abortion medication from across state lines. Now that's FDA-approved medication, and that's a violation of Interstate Commerce Clause, and we've got to make clear that that is not going to stand. In the long run, elections have consequences. We had the votes in the House last term to pass the Roe Act, which made, under congressional statute, not under the Supreme Court decision, abortion the law of the land. Didn't have the votes in the Senate because of the filibuster. The math is as simple, but also as challenging. Of we gotta win the House and the Senate.
Congressman over here.
Welcome to Fall River. Clearly, by the number of people that are here, the people of Fall River, I think, are deserving of their congressman having a local office with local staffing. Historically, that's what we've had in Fall River with our previous congressman, and I hope that you will institute that now that Fall River totally is in your district. Your mentioning of your commitment to clean energy, and you're sitting on the Transportation Committee. I'm particularly concerned, and while I celebrate the MBTA soon arriving in Fall River, the original commitment was, and the first priority was to have electrified trains, clean energy, transporting people from the South Coast to Boston. In order to expedite the process, we're now going to have diesel trains transporting people from the South Coast. Dirty energy that's going to adversely affect our community because those trains are going to be laid over here in Fall River. And I understand they don't shut them down, they just run all night, which is going to exacerbate the poor energy situation. And finally, with Martin Luther King Jr., who in the early 60s said that to truly address poverty and relatedly to address affordable housing, that people need income. And he promoted a guaranteed income, as did former candidate for president, Mr. Yang, who in many other places throughout the country have implemented pilot projects, and there are communities and countries throughout the world that are promoting guaranteed income. In a city such as Fall River, guaranteed income would give people the money they need to pay for this housing that's being developed. So those three issues I'd like you to hit on. Thank you.
So I'm continuing the practice of my predecessor, Congressman Kennedy, of having an office in Fall River here at City Hall, where we will do weekly office hours on Fridays, Wednesdays. It was Friday's last term. Wednesdays this term. People are always welcome to come by, and we are there to work with them. We also take a huge amount of constituent services via email or by phone call, and the office setup that I have now is what best enables me to respond to constituents throughout all 35 cities and towns. As for South Coast Rail, this is phase 1 of South Coast Rail, as you know, going through Taunton and Fall River and New Bedford. I think I'm not the project manager of South Coast Rail. It's a state-run project. I think it's unlikely to be electrified anytime soon, from what I can understand right now.
We do have a comment from the mayor on the South Coast.
On Steve, we went through this. Those trains do not run all night. They're all on plug-ins. They're not allowed. The EPA stopped it 5 or 6 years ago. They're just like a big tractor trailer truck. You plug them in and keep it warm. They're not running at night. That's all I want.
Got it, not at night. MBTA, as many of you I'm sure have seen, has a lot of priorities right now of just keeping the trains running on time and keeping its operational maintenance up to date. But I do think that South Coast Rail is going to be a net positive for South Coast Massachusetts, for Fall River, for Taunton, for New Bedford. It's going to shorten the commute between South Coast and Boston, and I think both support more economic development here as well as overall reduce housing costs throughout the Commonwealth. I'm in the long run supportive of electrifying commuter rail and regional rail and the MBTA as well. I have co-sponsored resolutions to that effect at the federal level, but I don't want to stand here and say that I think it's going to happen quickly, because that's not my understanding, and then give you a candid answer. Your last question was about with office, commuter rail? Universal income, yes. Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with this issue. Right now, the federal government and the state government have a wide range of transfer programs that support people. Social Security, obviously, and Medicare are the two most prominent ones at the federal level, but there's SNAP and there's a whole range of state services. I think if we were looking at a situation where we could simplify and expand our social safety net by turning a lot of these programs into a universal basic income, I think there's a lot to be said for that, and it would be worthy of exploration. And I think certainly candidate Yang got a lot of people excited about the idea. So ideologically, I'm receptive to it. I'm also a pragmatist, and I'm focused on the near term for what we can do to support people. Right now, in the near term, in the next 6 months, as we're seeing this federal budget and debt negotiations circle around Social Security and Medicare, my near-term focus is protecting Social Security and Medicare from any cuts that would harm people right now who are relying on these checks for their well-being.
Thanks, Congressman. We're going to have the comments. I know triples are amazing, but we're going to do singles from now on. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to revamp from there.
Congressman, I'm a political scientist. My specialization in international relations, political economy. One of my foci has been Europe, and including the post-communist regimes. This is beginning 10 years prior to the fall of the wall. I know dozens, if not hundreds, and I keep in correspondence with dozens of Ukrainians and Russians. Some of the Russians have left, some have stayed and actually support the regime, both academics as well as policymakers. I'm not exaggerating to say the destiny of the world is going to be decided in what transpires in Ukraine. The post-Second World War agreement is that we don't change borders by force. Even the Soviet Union followed that. And the reality is the most fundamental element that we need for our national security and to protect our democracy is a prosperous, democratic, free, allied Europe. And that will be undermined if Putin were to win. So I just wanted to say we live in a time of incredible cynicism as well as gullibility on the part of many people. So I would just I know you are very strong and clear for all the right reasons, and I commend you on that. And I would just encourage you to develop your capacity to communicate the importance of this issue to your constituency.
I hear you, and I agree with you. I've been a strong and early supporter of Ukraine, and I've worked to make it a bipartisan consensus in Congress that we're striving for the strategic defeat of Russia in Ukraine after its brutal and unprovoked invasion. It's not just the Ukrainians' lives and livelihoods, although of course that's paramount. It's also the rules-based international order that we helped architect after World War II. This is about making clear to Vladimir Putin, but also to the Ayatollahs in Iran and to Xi Jinping in China, that might does not make right. And we in the United States are always going to stand with freedom and democracy.
Congressman Auchincloss. My name is Raymond Hunt. I'm at the Arizona. So my question is, as a member of the Infrastructure Committee, I hear lots of talk of wind power and green energy and whatever as far as the infrastructure bill. I don't hear anything about hardening our infrastructure. There are numerous attacks, colonial gas, and people shooting up substations, that sort of thing, that are evident, and certainly our enemies have the capability of taking out our grid. Most recently with the Chinese balloon, if that had an EMP device, it would have taken out a big chunk of southwest Canada and northwest US. We are not capable of resisting that, so I don't see that expanding or changing our use from fossil fuels to electrical energy without hardening our grid is making that better.
It's a great question. I'll answer it in two parts. One is the hardening of the grid. I agree with you. We are vulnerable to attacks on municipal water, power, electric supplies, internet. We've seen this actually with the CCP in Taiwan. Obviously, we've seen what Russia has done in Ukraine. But even short of kinetic warfare, cyber attacks, as you say, can be levied against really core services that people rely on, and that could cause panic if they failed. We have made a lot of progress in the last 3 years to harden that. The Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, which is under the Department of Homeland Security, has been significantly plussed up under the Biden administration. They've gotten more funding, they've got better programming to work with our cities and towns on regional solutions and local solutions for things as kind of basic as, like, are you patching your software systems for your municipal water plant, for example, but also deeper ways to harden. It's also just true that sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and we have to continue to make it clear, as we do, although quietly, that any attacks on American critical infrastructure are going to be responded to with reciprocal attacks on the originating country's own infrastructure through cyber attacks. And we do have those capabilities, and they do have a deterrent effect. We have not seen any kind of sustained Russian or Chinese attacks on critical infrastructure to date, I think partly for that reason. Then to your point about energy, right now, Massachusetts is maybe the most energy-dependent state in the union. Our swing energy source is liquefied natural gas that we import through Everett from Trinidad and Tobago. And that means that we're very, very vulnerable to the price of energy in Europe, because those ships can decide, do we want to go ship to Europe or ship to the Massachusetts, to the eastern seaboard? And so our price goes up, for example, when Russia invades Ukraine. Our energy bills go up, as I'm sure many of you experienced. Average of $500 in this part of the Massachusetts and $200 in other parts. Offshore wind and other locally sourced clean energy generation, like the Quebec hydropower, would be clean, they'd be reliable, they'd be cheaper, and they would not be subject to international volatility. So I do think that offshore wind, along with other sources, is part of our hardening of our infrastructure.
Congressman, right over here. Oh, excuse me, please have a seat. You already had a moment to speak. No.
May I ask that those posing questions identify their community? I would like to know how many town residents, city residents, are standing up and asking questions. I think that's a reasonable
Okay, we're going to move
request.
to our next question right over here.
We don't know who these people are.
Go ahead.
Hello. So I have a question when it comes to the...
You live here?
Excuse me, he's speaking.
You're going to have to leave.
Yes, I do. Thank
I'd
you.
be glad to leave. Excuse me, I think we really need to know who it is that's feeding questions to you.
Excuse me, we're going to go on to the next question.
Myself.
Okay, here we go.
International. Georgetown University in Tufts.
As I was trying to say before, with the cost of living of food, and this month was the last SNAP benefits. Is there a chance that you and the other Congress can work together and try to keep the food stamps to go up more with the extra? Because the cost of living when it comes to eggs, milk, bread has been skyrocketed for the past year and a half. So
I know, and we increased the SNAP benefits last Congress in response to the COVID emergency. Unfortunately, as you indicate, that's ended, and it's got to be re-upped by Congress. And I'll be candid with you, it's very unlikely to happen with the House GOP in control. That's just not a program that they're going to. What? Yeah, I'm certainly supportive of it, and I support the efforts that Jim McGovern, my colleague from Central Massachusetts, is making to make school lunches and school breakfasts free and universal on a perpetual basis. But I don't think that in the near term, SNAP benefits are going to increase unless and until it's a Democratic majority in the House. That's not a partisan statement. That's just, I see the GOP priorities, and it's not expanding SNAP.
Senator Rodrick would like to address the crowd.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you. And just to address this issue, I'm Senator Michael Rodrick, and I happen to serve as chair of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means. And we in the Senate this week, as the House did last week, passed a supplemental budget that provides a 40% cushion for the remainder of this fiscal year on SNAP benefits, because as the Congressman said, COVID-related supplemental federal dollars are over because the COVID emergency has been lifted. So two things. One was those supplemental SNAP benefits, of which we're backfilling on the state side. And the second is universal free lunch in our schools. We appropriated $150 million state dollars this week to ensure that the rest of this school year, our students get the meals in school as they were before. We cannot afford to backfill every federal cut, but we are trying the best we can on SNAP and school lunches. We've done it. Myself and my colleagues from the House stepped up and did it just this past week.
Thanks, Senator. Ma'am, I think you had your.
Congressman.
Sorry.
Boom, boom, boom.
Hello, Congressman.
Hey.
My name is Paul Azevedo, one of your constituents. While public housing exists now and the conditions are deplorable, what do you propose to better the conditions for these people living in public housing? Namely, unsavory individuals, someone even tried to kick in my door, and of course, the real occurrence of pest infestation.
Expanded funding for the Housing and Urban Development Department at the federal level, which supports some of the public housing. And we tried to get that passed last Congress. It was not ultimately successful. But we clearly owe the occupants of public housing in Massachusetts and nationwide decent, hygienic, dignified accommodations.
Yes.
And I do understand that a lot of the accommodations are falling short of that standard now. I don't know if any of the state reps or state senator wants to respond on the housing front too, but it's up to you.
You said it well, and the mayor said it's a crisis everywhere in Massachusetts. We're trying to provide some tax credit benefits. We're trying to, we gathered a caucus together, 2 of them in the State House, just to talk about this. And those of you who are here know whether it's the Braga Bridge, the waterfront, or the Veterans Memorial Bridge, nothing happens overnight. We're gathering, we're trying to understand how we can help both our individual communities, working with the mayor, and how we can work on programs throughout the state. This is not unusual. I talked to someone here today, the housing crunch in Boston, then pushed residents out of Boston into other communities, and I'll use Brockton as an example because we talked about that this morning. From Brockton, people have moved further south where they can find more affordable housing, which we've always been labeled as one of the most affordable places to live in the Commonwealth, as some places out west, Pittsfield and others, but that's changing, and we know that. And, you know, everything's on the table for discussion. We can't make a blanket statement. Someone called me the other day and said, everyone should pay no more than $500 a month for rent. Well, you know, talk to the landlord that owns a property that's getting $750 or $1,000 or whatever it might be. So we've got to figure this out. And I just wanted to comment on one thing I heard today was all the market rate housing. It is not, actually, if anything, it's freeing up some more affordable housing. So market rate does not correlate to the issue of why other units are less affordable. What that's allowing us to do is provide housing for working individuals, young professionals, and empty nesters who are looking for some alternative style of housing. As you all know, the housing in Fall River, primarily the majority of it has been built by the 1950s. And so it needs help, and it needs renovation. So we're working on this. I can't tell you there's an absolute solution, but we're very aware it's one of the top priorities, and we'll continue listening to you and understanding some of the solutions that we can put into place. Thank you. Did you want to say something?
Thank you, and thank you, Congressman, for being in Fall River today. So important to everyone. But the housing issue, it is a priority for us. Our district office in the South End, we see 7 to 10 people a week who are either being evicted or have to move because the price of rent has increased. And it's a serious problem, but as Rep. Viola mentioned just now, we're members of the Housing Caucus. There are 2 of them. It's such a priority. The governor has made it a priority. She's talked with us about this issue. She's talking to the mayor. We're working as close as we possibly can daily with the Fall River Housing Authority, with the nonprofit organizations and others to try to get people into affordable homes, something that they can afford. We do understand it's a problem, and as these wheels turn, they're turning slowly, but there will be relief as time goes on. That's all I can say about it, but it is the primary issue. And when I say it's a primary issue in Fall River, it's a primary issue in almost every gateway city. You look at Brockton and Springfield and Pittsfield and Bedford, all of those cities are having serious problems with housing. And that's because the price of rents have gone skyrocketed. You know, how do we do that? And if someone purchases a 3-family home, you know, 8 years ago, a 3-family home in Fall River was, you could purchase one for $150,000. Today, they're $400,000 or higher.
Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, and we'll see how much more time we have.
My name is Shoshana Brown. Yes, I live in Fall River. This is more of a federal question. Every now and then I hear some murmuring about maybe we should have a federal program, not a draft for the military, but a draft for something like the WPA or the VISTA kind of program, because too many Americans are not used to living or being with other Americans who are different from them, and we're at each other's throats. And I think it could have so many benefits. I'm not going to make a speech, but is there any talk about that at the federal level?
There has been. I would not say it's at the forefront right now of congressional debate, but there absolutely has been, and there has been some bipartisan support for it. As a veteran myself, I certainly see the value that you're describing of being with people of different walks of life, of being outside of your comfort zone in different parts of the country, and it can imbue a sense of pride and of civility, I think, that can last a lifetime. So I see much merit in what you're describing. I would probably be supportive of something that started more at the state level and let states experiment, where let them be the laboratories of democracy and see what different forms of national service look like. I'll give you one example, which was out of Colorado. My friend Joe Neguse proposed a climate corps which was a sort of a national service idea, I think largely done at the state level though, that would put people to work on environmental resilience and on other clean energy and stewardship projects.
Okay, Congressman, right here.
Thank you. Congressman, thank you for being here. I'd like to start by saying God bless America. I'm retired, so I'm living on fixed income. People are living on fixed income, they should have fixed expenses. So I asking you, what are the possibilities that, number one, no more state income tax to retirees, no more property tax to retirees, and limit the income that people make if they retire and they make certain amount of income, to say, if you make more than that, then you tax him like President Biden did. He said, you make 400,000, no taxes. So my question is, which some states already thinking about it, and it's on the table, to eliminate completely property income tax and state income tax, especially on people for Social Security who live on COLA.
Well, I can't speak to the state level policy. At the federal level, the president has been clear from the days he was campaigning, and I've agreed with him from the days he was campaigning, that in this country we want to reward work, not wealth. And that means a tax code that encourages people to work and that also asks those who have great wealth to pay a bit more and to make sure that we can provide for high quality housing and infrastructure and research and the public goods that support all of us and that make this economy and society more prosperous and rich. So I do believe in a progressive tax code, which I think is the core of the question that you're asking. And at the federal level, we've made progress in the last 2 years in enacting that, actually, under the Inflation Reduction Act. And I can't speak to state policy and won't try to.
Congressman, right here. So we're going to have 3 more questions here, here, and then this gentleman.
Oh, 4. The woman with the brain. You already spoke.
I want to make a comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Mindy Charlotte. I'm a resident of Westport, Mass. And I have a federal question for you as well. I'd like to address the thousands and thousands of undocumented asylum candidates that are living in Massachusetts. There's a real need for fair treatment of these people. In my eyes, there's 2 categories at the moment. I'm very concerned about the children that came here when they were very young. They had no say, and in some situations, their families did not fill out the paperwork that they should have when they were young, and now they're adults married to Americans and have children born in the States, and these people are being threatened to be deported. There's another category of undocumented people who came here as young adults, illegally perhaps, have applied for asylum and are not getting it. These are people who also have children that are born in this country, and the risk of them being deported to countries that they haven't been in 20, 30, 40 years with children that are American seems completely unfair to me. I want to know, on a federal level, will you work with Department of Homeland Security? Will you work with the federal government to stop this craziness of people that are hardworking Americans paying their taxes and have children born in this country? People are being threatened to go back to Haiti where they will be killed immediately.
Yes, and I have, and I will continue to. I've been a strong supporter of documentation and dignity for dreamers, which I think is the population you're really describing here, with children who, through no fault of their own, came to America. It's the only country they've ever known, and they're contributing to the local community, they're contributing to the economy, working at higher rates than native-born Americans, I would add, and they deserve to have the stability in their lives that we all take for granted, having a U.S. citizenship. And so I've co-sponsored and worked to advance legislation that would do that. But and I feel like I've said this a couple of times today, but it is the truth, and I always want to be candid with my constituents. This is unlikely to pass on its own in Congress. This is going to require being part of a more integrated, comprehensive immigration bill. We have seen, really since the George W. Bush administration, that we actually largely see what the contours of an agreement would be. It would be more funding for border security and expanding the number of Article 3 judges to do due process at the border for undocumented people. It would be investment in the countries of origin, the Central American countries that are causing many emigres to flee poverty and crime. And it would be documentation and dignity for those who are already here and who are contributing. These three things together are always, people have always understood that they have to be done together in a bipartisan way, and it's going to be a hard vote. The flanks of both parties are going to revolt against any compromise because that's the nature of our politics too often, and it's going to be an 80%, not 100% solution. I'm ready to take that hard vote. I've been very clear about that, understanding that it will be a hard vote. I have not seen the same willingness from my center-right Republican colleagues to take that hard vote for fear of their own hard right revolting. And we really need the GOP to step up and make immigration an issue to govern on and not an issue to campaign on.
Right here, Congressman.
Thank you, Representative, for being here today. My question has to do with the upcoming debt limit increase. I know that the current House majority has said that they oppose increasing the debt limit. Do you think that we'll be able to come to some sort of agreement before we hit that limit? And if we don't, what do you see as the potential effects to the local community?
We have to. It'll be a catastrophe if the United States defaults on its debt. I really want to underscore this. This is not some abstract, Washington problem. This affects people's retirement accounts. This affects our global standing and our ability to do anything on the world stage. For almost 100 years now, a U.S. Treasury has been the safest security you can get. And that'll change if we default on our debt. And the ramifications of that are beyond any one individual's ability to predict, but they will ripple far and wide, and it will not be good. We cannot hold hostage the full faith and credit of the United States to Washington politics, okay? The Republicans have points of views on debt and spending and deficits. Democrats have points of views. That's fair game, that's politics, let's fight it out. And we have a process for doing that. It's called the appropriations cycle, and we do it every year. Whether or not to pay our bills in time is not the opportunity to do that. That is money that we've already spent. That is just whether the United States is a good credit risk or not. And so they can't, the GOP should not be holding hostage our credit rating. Unfortunately, they are. I do think that we will get a deal. I'm certainly committed to one. But this deal cannot cut Medicare and Social Security in order to give the GOP a win for holding hostage the debt limit. They are not going to try to claim that they're balancing the budget on the backs of people who need to rely on these programs for their health care and for their retirement accounts. And that's been the president's position, that's my position, and I do think we can sustain it.
Right here, Congressman.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I'd like to echo what the previous woman had said about your incredible outreach to constituents, emails, mailings, etc. My question is, what more? I think everybody in this room can probably agree with me that they're very disheartened, very disappointed, very traumatized by the pandemic of gun violence. So I wonder what, on the national level, can be done to try and start to curb and to kind of stem back that whole everyday issue that we hear about and experience.
The question was about gun violence and what we can do to address it. And I just first want to convey how deeply I agree with you. I was a Marine officer. I slept, ate, trained, patrolled with an assault weapon for 4.5 years. I've seen these weapons of war at work, and the idea that deranged individuals are taking these into classrooms is, to me, as a father of young kids, it is too much to contemplate. And yet we are forced to, every single day in this country, acknowledge that it's happening. And it's preventable. This is not some kind of tornado that just happens from natural causes. We are off the charts, quite literally, compared to other developed nations in our gun violence per capita. And it's because we got a ton of guns and very lax gun rules. And I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, but at a certain point, the facts and figures just don't lie. When you put in place common sense gun safety regulations that a majority of not just Americans, but a majority of gun owners actually endorse, you save lives. And we know that right here in Massachusetts. Safe storage laws, which require people to store their weapons safely. Red flag laws, which means that if you've got a history of violence or if you're threatening somebody, a judge can take your weapon away. Background checks, so that if you've got a criminal background, you can't just purchase a gun from Walmart. Restrictions on high-capacity magazines, a ban on assault weapons. All of these things Massachusetts has done. All of these things have saved tens of thousands of lives in Massachusetts. And we've got to take that same model and apply it at the federal level. I've co-sponsored and voted for all the bills that would do that. And unfortunately, this isn't a partisan statement, it's just a vote counting statement. The GOP will not give an inch. They will not vote for one piece of common sense gun safety legislation because they're afraid of the NRA. And at a certain point, it got to be taken to the ballot box, and voters are going to have to hold them to account for it, because I can't twist GOP members' arms, as I've tried on the House floor. I've begged them, and they won't do it. And so I think voters are going to have to hold them to account. Voters like you around the country are going to have to say that their kids' safety trumps the NRA's talking points.
Congressman, 2 final questions.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for being the voice of the people, and thank you for your efforts of helping to have clean water. My question is between the Inflation Reduction Act and the ARPA funding, as a citizen and property owner in the city of Fall River, how can I get assistance to ensure that I have a clean, safe water supply coming to my home? Thank you.
Well, if you got questions about your own individual water quality at your home, I would suggest working with City Hall on that and for a water test. I'll just say broadly, though, everybody deserves clean water, and it's been a core commitment of mine from day one that we're going to invest in water infrastructure for potability and for safety, because Massachusetts built our water infrastructure a long time ago, and that was great. We were ahead of the curve, but now it's old, and we've got to fix it. We've got to fix it in terms of inflow and infiltration, patching up our pipes so that bad things don't get in and the water doesn't get out and make it more expensive. And also in terms of PFAS remediation and other water treatment facilities. I've directed a fair bit of federal funding to those. Last term, we passed at the federal level bipartisan funding for water safety, and the state now has more funding for that than it has in a long while. And I do think we're going to start to see a lot of progress on water treatment because of that.
Hi, Judy Conrad. I'm the chair of the Ward 8 Democrats in Fall River. And a couple of years ago, the Democrats were talking a lot about something called the Green New Deal. And it was getting people really excited. A lot of us voted for Bernie Sanders for president. And we were going to actually deal with climate change, and which is desperately in need of being dealt with, and also produce a lot of good jobs for people. It was really going to be a good idea, and I know it's never going to pass our current Congress, but possibly if we kept talking about these good ideas, people would start voting for people who had the good ideas instead of bad ideas. Is anything still alive of the Green New Deal, is my question.
Well, no, I mean, not only is it alive, but we passed a big portion of it. I'm a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. I am in support of the mandate behind it. And then last year, in August of 2022, we passed the biggest, boldest climate action and clean energy investment in history. It was a series of clean energy tax credits as well as direct grants for environmental resilience that really take the Green New Deal, which is more abstract, and turn it into actual federal policy. It is going to put us on track to hit our Paris Accord commitments. It's going to allow the United States on the world stage to walk into our negotiations with China and India, who account for 60% of all future fossil fuel emissions, with our shoulders back and our chin up, that we're doing our part and they need to do their part. It's also going to create a lot of good jobs in a sector where Massachusetts can thrive and lead the way. Offshore wind is just one example of a whole portfolio of new industries that can and are developing on the heels of this investment. So I would not feel like it's been forgotten. If anything, it's actually been enacted in large measure. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I believe we're at our last question. I've enjoyed the give and take, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.